Early voting is underway across Virginia for an April 21st statewide referendum that could give temporary power to redraw states' congressional districts only ahead of this fall midterm election. If voters approve, the move would likely reshape the current 6-5 partisan split in Virginia's delegation into a map favoring Democrats in as many as 10 of the state's 11 districts. What does this mean for the Commonwealth of Virginia, and what does it mean for the country? Will this referendum pass and equal out the number of representatives in Congress so that it'll be a fair vote come midterm election? It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Eric LaVille, and you're joining us for our 2026 Referendum Redistricting show. Once again, we want to thank you for joining us, as you always do, on this Sunday morning as we broadcast from the campus of the Norfolk State University, home of the Spartan Nation, from none other than WNSB Hot 91, the soul of VA. You know, once again, we've come out of very hotly contested, incredible, and insightful General Assembly session, and we're right now into early voting. We're voting for a constitutional referendum here in the Commonwealth of Virginia that is like no other. 10 days remain before April 21st, before the polls close at 8 p.m., to where you have an opportunity to cast your vote to determine whether the Commonwealth of Virginia should redraw their lines and give voters an opportunity to vote in 11 really new districts across the Commonwealth, which could possibly give Democrats 10 seats, which they already favor 6-5. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about this across the board. We've reported it and on this show, and you know, it is a lot to really think about. But the reasoning behind it, we're going to go on this particular series. We're going to look at on this show today the reason behind it once again. Also, what are the efforts across the state, and more specifically Hampton Roads, that we see that are happening in order to gear up voting? Because keep in mind, this is an off-cycle vote. It's an early vote. So with this being an early vote, there's a lot of interesting things that, you know, that are happening. But also, because you're not used to voting at this time period, you know, we kind of find ourselves, are we really excited about voting? So next week, we're going to look at our Get Out the Vote show, and we're going to look at and have individuals on the show to talk about the reason why you should go out and vote. And we're also going to look at where the governor stands on this. But according to the Virginia Mercury, Democrats say it's a necessary move to counter gerrymandering to favor Republicans in other states at the behest of President Donald Trump. Now, Republicans are framing this as a partisan power grab that will undo the work of Virginia's Bipartisan Redistricting Commission and the Supreme Court of Virginia, which created the current map in 2021. Once again, as I stated, we're going to first take a look at why this is the case. Why are we having this redistricting right now? Then we're going to take a look at the efforts that have taken place around the state, more specifically Hampton Roads, just this past week. And then also, we're going to take a look at where the governor stands. And we're going to look at some of the opposition and what they are saying. So why are we here? Why are we at the polls voting? And why is yes and why is no so important? It's literally, you're only pushing yes or no. That's it. Yes or no. But that very simple vote that you're going to make, that one vote, will possibly decide the next Congress. Now, let's go back just a little bit. Last year in 2025, President Donald Trump, our current president, he asked Texas legislature to draw him 5 more congressional seats, Republican seats, to help them keep power in the midterm election. Now, first of all, slightly unprecedented. Well, it's actually unprecedented, but, you know, that's not anything strange for our president to do. He's done a lot of things that have been unprecedented, and the Republican-controlled Congress that controls the House of Representatives and the Senate and the Supreme Court by 6-3 are allowing him to do it. All right. So I want to make sure we're clear on how these things are able to take place. President duly elected, a majority of Americans said, we want this person in the White House as opposed to anyone else. Majority of Americans said, we trust this person to lead our country into their mantra of making America great, be more prosperous, and the whole nine. We trust this president. We want him in office not to create any more foreign wars, as he said he would. We trust this president to bring peace and shape America in the image that they want to shape in. Well, they've been off to a running start doing just that. And I think he's done a lot of things that they probably didn't think he would do, but many on the Democratic side, and especially African-American side, say, hey, this is what's actually going to happen. But neither here nor there. Just to give an example that this is not unprecedented for our president, one thing that he did ask, he asked the Texas Republican legislature to draw him 5 more congressional seats. Why is that? Because the popularity of the current president and the policies that he's being allowed to go forth with through the White House, which are being basically co-signed by the Republican-controlled Congress, either through vote or no vote, by abrogating their power. This is not, he said basically these things are unpopular with the voters. So, and he knows that if Democrats get in power, if they take the House and possibly the Senate, it could be doomsday for his administration. Now, let's kind of take a look at why this is, again, important as relates to voting. When you look at 5 additional seats, that now gives Republicans an advantage of more than three plus. So basically they have 3-seat advantage in the House of Representatives. And by doing so, this will give them 5 more on top of that, right? So give them some wiggle room, right? But in order to draw these districts, that means you have to draw out Democratic districts. So with that, Texas said, we'll oblige you. And they drew out 5 districts. All right. So they basically approved, the legislature and the governor, Republican governor, Greg Abbott, signed it. Notice they did not put this before the voters, and that's very important. Now, moving forward, what ended up happening is that those districts that were drawn out were a lot of what we call minority districts, but I use the term non-white districts, non-majority districts. Those districts were from Texas to Houston, a lot of Hispanic districts, brown, and also African-American districts. The Congressional Black Caucus lost a seat out of there. Again, this is racial gerrymandering, right? The Supreme Court ruled this in 2006, but this Supreme Court approved it by 6-3. So in 2006, Supreme Court by plurality decision, more votes than not, more votes than good that went against it, said that this is not right. This is racial gerrymandering, according to the Voting Rights Act, right? But this Supreme Court said it was okay. So from 2006 to 2025, when it was challenged, almost 20 years later, the Supreme Court changed the decision. Oh, why elections are so important. The justices that changed on the court were appointed by this President Donald Trump, from his first term from 2016 to 2020. That's why elections matter. That's why. Because if the Supreme Court would have not changed, if he would not have appointed those justices in this time period from 2016 to 2020, guess what? Then when it was challenged in Texas, the Supreme Court would have ruled, you can't do this. So let's move forward. California withdrew through a Proposition 60, which they put before the voters. They said that they wanted to redraw districts as well, 5 to even out the districts on the Republican side. Again, they could have drew more, but they said we're only going to do 5 because that's what Texas did. In other words, to create a balance. So now you have other states. You have North Carolina that redrew their districts mid-decade. And they drew out, again, competitive Democratic district for the Congressional Black Caucus, Don Davis, right here in northeastern North Carolina. And also you look at states, a couple other states as well, that also redrew their districts. In Missouri, they redrew out another Congressional Black Caucus member. And then also in the state of Ohio, 2 other congressional districts are withdrawn. So with the redrawing of those districts in those Republican states, 1 + 1 + 2 = 4. Virginia said, now again, the state legislators did that. But in Virginia and in California, they're putting it before the voters. So here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the Democratic-controlled legislature said, we're going to put this before the voters and have you vote on it. That's the difference between the Republican-led legislatures and the Democratic-led legislatures. The Republicans, they're doing it by themselves, getting the governor to sign it, not putting it before the people. Democratic-led states, California, Virginia, they said, listen, we want the people to speak. We want you to vote on it because we want you to have a voice. Again, look who's giving a voice to the people and look who's making decisions themselves. So with that being the case, Virginia said, we'll draw districts. We'll draw 4. Why? Because there were 3 Republican states that drew 4. Once again, in Virginia, they wanted to create a balance, not create an imbalance. So if this referendum passes, that means that right now we have an even balance between congressional seats in the November election. Now, I want to just also note that redrawing lines mid-decade is not, again, it's not normal. Usually lines are redrawn, congressional lines, and congressional seats are shifted after every decade. Why is that? Because we take a U.S. census, which tells us where the population is. So this mid-decade, which was spurred by the president, with Texas first and then other Republican states follow behind him, Democratic states said, we want to give balance back to the House of Congress, so we're going to do it only temporarily. Because what happens in 5 years, actually 4 now, we get another census, which means we redraw our lines again. So it's only a temporary measure. So you'll see advertisement that says this is permanent. It's a power grab. Well, it's giving balance back. And what's happening is that it becomes temporary because after 2 election cycles, after the next census, we will get another lines drawn by the bipartisan commission here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So that's the reason why we're here. That is the reason in a nutshell. But what are the efforts moving forward and what has been done in Virginia to get the vote out just this past week? And also, what is the stance of our governor? It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Eric LaVille, and you're joining us for our 2026 Referendum Redistricting series. Right now in this show, we're exploring why we are here and why we're asking to be voting yes or no. Why did Virginia redraw their lines anyway? And now we're going to take a look at what has happened in the Commonwealth of Virginia and why all eyes are the Commonwealth. As I always say, as Virginia goes, so goes the rest of the country. With that could not be any truer than this particular referendum that we have, because if this referendum does not pass, that means that Republicans receive an unfair 4-vote advantage in the upcoming congressional race for November, which then gives an opportunity for the Republicans to keep power, which gives an opportunity for the president to continue doing what he's doing, both internationally with wars, domestically by bypassing Congress, which is what he's doing because the Republicans allow him to do it, and instead of going to the people and continue the agenda for the next 2 years. The question becomes, do Virginians see the bigger picture, and is that message getting out? Just this past week, I was fortunate enough to moderate a panel at 6 Mount Zion Baptist Church in the city of Hampton, organized by the Hampton branch of the NAACP. On that particular panel, we had our U.S. Congressman Bobby Scott, which represents the 3rd Congressional District. We also had a lawyer. We also had a cybersecurity specialist, AI consultant, a social media specialist, and then also a census mapping specialist as well. On that panel, the discussion was about from every aspect, congressional, legal, cybersecurity, AI, social media, and then also the geographical census mapping perspective. We broke down those aspects of the why this measure is important, but also how we got here and what is impacting the future. Very similar to what I kind of discussed previously. We got here because of our president, but Virginia can, again, bring balance. So with that being the case, there is a huge effort that's out there trying to get people out to vote. Roland Martin, the Roland Martin Unfiltered Show, actually did a HBCU tour. He toured Virginia State on Thursday of last week. There he had several guests. We had our 2 U.S. senators that were there, Mark Warner, Tim Kaine, U.S. Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan, the first African-American Congresswoman in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Also, the Speaker of the House of Representatives there well, not the Speaker of Congress. I'm kind of jumping the gun because more than likely, if Democrats win, this great Capitol brother, Hakeem Jeffries, will be the first African American Speaker of the House. So I'm jumping the gun, good brother, but we're rooting for you. But he is the minority leader of the House, meaning that he is the head of the Democratic arm or caucus of the House of Representatives. Now, with that being the case, they also came to the Norfolk State University on last Friday. On last Friday, they came here again with U.S. Senator Mark Warner and U.S. Senator Tim Kaine, also Congressman Bobby Scott, Speaker of this House of the Commonwealth of Virginia, Don Scott. Also, we had Senator Mamie Locke, who's also a majority leader of the House, of the Virginia Senate. Of these tours, they spoke about the importance of why individuals should go out to vote and pushing individuals out to get out and vote for this election. Now, keep in mind, you can go vote early right now. You can vote early and make your voice heard. 45 days from the first day of voting, which is April 21st. Again, we had 10 days before you go out and vote. And that's going to help us to decide this, not just this referendum, but it's also going to decide, on top of that, the future of not just the Commonwealth, but the future of the country. Because, once again, the Republicans, they are not waiting around. The president's not waiting around, but he is standing right there waiting for their people, they're the Republicans, to give him the power to continue doing what he wants to do. Now, where does our governor stand and where is the push? So we talked about what the representatives are doing. We talked about the leaders of both Congress, Democratic side, and also the leaders of this side, what they're doing here in the Commonwealth. When we take a look at what they're doing, the question becomes, our biggest rock star, the Democratic Party. Everyone's looking at the governor here. We talked about the governor of Texas and the governor of the other Republican-led states that went straight to the legislature. We looked at the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, who is a 2028 candidate in order to become president, run for president. Now, the question becomes, where's Governor Spanberger? Abigail Spanberger, who's also being looked upon as being presidential and possible throwing her hat in the ring. Where does she fall in this as far as the race goes? According to Virginia Mercury, as redistricting referendum nears, Governor Spanberger is balancing governing and also campaigning. Now, polls show tight support while Democrats press for a stronger push and Republicans ramp up their opposition. Now, Governor Spanberger on last Wednesday pushed back against criticism from some fellow Democrats who say she has not done enough publicly to rally support for Virginia's April 21st redistricting referendum. Now, Governor Spanberger argued that she's been clear in her support by prioritizing governing in the early months of her administration. She said in front of the executive mansion, quote, "I've made it very clear that I support a yes vote. I think Virginians should vote yes," she told the reporters. But her quote, "My priority and my responsibility is on governance." Now, the governor is, of course, she was busy signing bills into law. But the referendum is set for, again, April 21st. Early voting is on the way. Now, once again, this is a temporary redrawing of congressional districts mid-decade in response to the aggressive map changes in other states encouraged and pushed and insisted by our president, President Donald Trump. Now, when we take a look at what's happening, I want to take a look at some polls. All right, so some supporters say, according to Virginia Mercury, the move is necessary to maintain partisan balance nationally. While critics argue it risks politicizing the process. Well, it's already politicized, right? So a recent Washington Post Schar School poll highlighted the tight divide among voters, with 52% of likely voters saying they're in favor of the measure. Now, what happens is these findings underscore both the significance of the vote and the uncertainty headed into the final weeks before the election. Now, the governor dismissed suggestions that her approach has been too restrained compared with other Democratic leaders. We talked about Gavin Newsom, who actively campaigned for a redistricting-related ballot measure in his state. Now, that measure Once again, I said Proposition 60 earlier, but I want to correct myself. It's Proposition 50. It expanded the reforms tied to independent redistricting oversight and was framed as a response to partisan gerrymandering concerns nationwide. Now, I want to make sure, once again, I drive home this point. In California, like Virginia, they did not just make this decision in a Democratic-controlled legislature and with a Democratic governor. They put it before the voters. Here we have a constitutional referendum. In California, they put up Proposition 50, right? Now, when we start to take a look at the significance of these rallying people to vote, getting out campaigning actively, money is also very important. Let's keep that in mind. Money is also very important. So there's over $1 million worth of TV ads, according to Virginia Mercury, that Spanberger said. And at the same time, her party is doing the job she was told Virginia she was doing, which is governing. Now, when we take a look at the amount of money that's coming through, you're seeing ads, I'm seeing ads are everywhere. You know, you're getting mailers, you're getting conflicting information back and forth. But it is major. Millions of dollars. According to, you can look up Virginia Public Access Project. When you take a look at VPAP, it shows that there are millions of dollars being pumped in on the Democratic side to get this measure over. As a matter of fact, the Washington Post sharp poll also found that with the approval rating of the governor, it's kind of interesting. 47% with 46 disapproving, 7% undecided. Those around some tight margins as well nationally. But Larry Sabato, who is a major voice in politics, phenomenal career at the University of Virginia Center for Politics, he talked about, when we take a look at the governor, her dip in polling, he said this is very stunning. But he also said that Spanberger also brushed aside concerns that the polling emphasizing her electoral mandate and ongoing work in office. So once again, we're taking a look at what's happening from the governor's side and then what the polls are saying with voters. Now, let's take a look at what's happening on the GOP funded side, the Vote No campaign. Now, with this particular campaign, Republicans have seized on the issue to mount a coordinated opposition to this campaign. As a matter of fact, former Governor Glenn Youngkin recently criticized the referendum during an appearance on a podcast hosted by Sean Hannity of Fox News. He called it, quote, illegal and unconstitutional, unquote, and warning it would undermine the state's redistricting framework. Now, I just want to point out, because this show is about transparency and truth and also what's in the law. You know, we don't tell you what to do, but we give you the law. There's nothing illegal and unconstitutional about this referendum. The courts have ruled on it. The General Assembly, Democratic-controlled General Assembly, went by the book. The Republicans challenged it, and the court ruled that it was not. It was done by the book. Okay? So, for the most part, now there's another ruling that is pending, but more than likely, if this fails, the court's not even going to take it up because it'll be moot. And I believe that if this measure does succeed, they probably won't take it up either because voters' voices are tend to be louder than a lot of interpretation of the law, especially when it's very close. But again, that's just my looking through my crystal ball there. So when you take a look at what's happening, we kind of take a look at what Youngkin and what he's doing. Now, he's scheduled to appear, our former governor, on a Vote No rally in Lynchburg. He also appeared there alongside U.S. Representatives McGuire, Jen Kiggins, State Senators Mark Peake of Lynchburg, Wendell Walker of Lynchburg, and also Luther Cyphers of Prince Edwards, all Republicans. Now, keep in mind, this is very important for Republicans because guess what? They could lose their seats, right? They could lose their place. McGuire and Kiggins, as a matter of fact, are among the Republican incumbents whose districts would be more competitive if the referendum passes. Now, I will say, based upon the job that Jen Kiggins has done and what the president has done, it's more than likely, even without this referendum, that she would lose in that district because the district in Virginia Beach is a purple district, and it is the most flipped district in Congress, right? Matter of fact, that district actually at one time helped to decide the balance. So, but with that, when you take a look at the politics around it and the politics around it, you have to put Spanberger in a delicate spot, according to analysts. But veteran Virginia political analyst Bob Holsworth said the governor's approach is consistent with how she has handled the issue from the outset, and I agree. She is a centrist, and that's how she's handled everything. Now, let's take a look also as early voting continues. The referendum is shaping up as both a policy question and a political test, not just for Virginia's congressional map, but also for the governor's influence within her party. Now this is really about Congress. This is what Bob Holsworth said. It's not about governing Virginia. But if for someone who certainly would want to have a national profile, if the referendum doesn't pass, she'll take a significant hit from the national Democrats, and they will put the blame squarely on her. Now, when you take a look at what is happening as it relates to not just the governor, again, we talked about what has been done on the other side to get the vote out. And on this side, we want to take a look at the opposition. Now, we take a look at the opposition. We take a look at not just the rallies that our governor has done, but we also look at the mailers that have gone out and the mismessaging. We did a show on this with Roger Chesney, who's also a journalist from this area, who's done a lot of work. But we also looked at, when we take a look at that particular part of mismessaging, we also take a look at what Republicans aim to do. If they are able to defeat this referendum, it's going to give them a major boost in their standing and be able to basically fight against what the Democrats want to do. However, Virginia civil rights leaders have decried the misinformation and redistricting fight. You've seen Virginian Democrat veterans rally for yes in voting in this redistricting referendum. You've seen all types of movements across the board. But I will say this. When you take a look at what's happening, in 10 days, we will know if, as Virginia goes, so goes the rest of the country when Virginians go to the polls and vote. I urge you to make your voice heard. If you believe that the way that things are going in Congress and in the White House, and you believe the president should continue to do the job that he's doing, then vote no on this referendum. But if you believe that there needs to be a change in Congress, if you believe what the Democrats are saying, that they can do a better job, if you believe that it's time for a change in Congress and it's time for representatives not to abrogate their voice of the people and basically to give the people a voice in stopping the president and a lot of his measures internationally and domestically, then vote yes for this referendum and elect people that will represent you. Once again, go out and vote. Early voting has started. Continue to vote. Take a friend with you. It is your right. It is your power. It's in your hands. Until next time, be good, be great. God bless. And we'll see you next week for our Get Out the Vote show.
Hi, I'm Carrie Washington, and you're listening to State of the Water with award-winning host Dr. Eric Claville.